I apologize for its length, but I needed to tell this since no one believes me this summer. I had several encounters with mysterious creatures, some really terrifying. This past summer, I worked at a Boy Scout camp, and there had been rumors of spirits patrolling the nature trail on the far side of the camp. One night after work, me and two other coworkers, Steve and Jim, decided to walk the trail at midnight. We were about halfway through the trail when Jim told us to stop, and we listened. It sounded like something was gnawing on bones and tearing flesh. We shone our flashlights to see the remains of a deer, but the rib cage was torn open, almost flattened. The deer's entrails were scattered across the fourth floor, and the skull was crushed. And we could still hear the noises. Steve told us that we should get the fuck out of here, but we pressed on deeper into the forest. Suddenly, Jim stopped in front of us, and I asked him what's up, and he just pointed his light forward, about 20 yards away. We saw this thing. It crouched with its back behind us, tearing into what we believed was a piece of the deer. It stopped and slowly rose, standing almost 10 feet, and it dropped whatever it was eating and turned around. Its face was nothing but a skull, but no human skull. It looked like a deer skull. Its arms were long and lanky, ending in large claws. Jim screamed, "Holy fuck," as we began to run. The creature let out a horrifying screech, and I made the mistake of turning around. The beast went on all fours and charged at us, breaking smaller trees and stumps as it ran at us. We continued to run as we got off the trail, and stopped as we got into the pool building. As we collected ourselves again, I could hear something outside. When I looked outside, this creature was standing under a light post, breathing slowly. It destroyed the light above it with one swipe of its clawed hands before disappearing back into the darkness. The next encounter was a couple of days later, when it was me and two other lifeguards, Colin and Maya. They were sitting in the office as a thunderstorm ravaged the camp. We watched the rain when a flash of lightning showed us something, standing on the other side of the pool fence. Maya shrieked as the beast disappeared. Where it looked like it walked towards the lake, I followed the beast into the pouring rain, where I unfortunately lost it. The next morning, we found that the geese that lived near the lake were torn to shreds, and it took us an hour to clean up the entire mess. The next encounter was the next to last week of camp, and this was honestly the most terrifying experience. It was a Wednesday night, and I traveled the nature trail alone, and then I heard it. Something was laughing at me, and it sounded like it was close to me. I turned and saw the biggest creature I ever saw. It stood about 10 feet and had a deer skull for a head, with massive bloody antlers. It began to trace me as I ran the trail. I could hear that the brush behind me was crushed, and the beast was breathing heavily. It felt like hours, but it was only a few minutes till I figured I lost it. After I stopped to catch my breath, I could feel my backpack being torn. And when I turned, I saw it. I then locked myself in the pool office, and I was terrified. When I heard it ram the door, when it stopped, I could hear someone's voice, and through the crack, I could see it skulk around the building, and I never saw it again that night. The final encounter was the last. It was during the last week when each night I saw the creature lumber through the parking lot. It looked like it had something in its grasp as it tore into it. I ran back to my campsite, and as I laid in my sleeping bag, I heard footsteps trudging through the campsite. When I looked up, I saw its blood-covered snout poke its head through the tent flaps. Its red eyes casted an eerie glow inside the tent, and I could hear it breathe, and what I thought was laughter. Each night, it returned and stuck its head in various tents until one staff member woke up and screamed. The next day, we couldn't find him, and spent the day looking for him until we found him in the parking lot. He looked pale and told us that it grabbed him and took him to the old BB range, and when it left, he ran. That night, me and 3 other people took flashlights and went to explore the range. It was decrepit, and vines grew all over it. And then we saw them, several carcasses of deer, strewn about the place in various stages of decay. And they appeared to be partially consumed. One guard screamed as the window rose from behind the rock wall in front of the range and charged at us. We ran back to the science building and we watched. As it came out in the light, this one had blue eyes and was extremely thin, and it had 3 long fingers ending in claws, and it scraped the ground and sniffed the air until it slowly returned to the forest. That was the last encounter I had, though I plan on returning to find it again. Several years ago, I lived in a basement suite with my 2 kids. There was a lot of paranormal activity in the 2 years that we lived there. We ended up moving out due to guys upstairs partying and doing crack, so that could have contributed to stuff going on downstairs. The first week that I moved in, my kids were at their dad's house. I was alone in the living room in total silence, reading something on my laptop. I had an upholstered chair sitting a few feet from me. I heard something that sounded like a very heavy object, like a book, hitting the seat of the chair. Although really the seat was soft enough that anything heavy hitting it would not have made much sound at all. But that was where the sound was coming from. I glanced up, and when I did, I saw this thing on the chair. It kind of looked like a little ferret, sandy or caramel color. When it saw me look over it, tried to duck behind me onto the chair, and it just disappeared. It was there 1 second and gone the next. It surprised me, but didn't frighten me. It was just weird. I can't even say that it looked like a ferret. That is just the only thing that I could compare it to. About a year later, my youngest son and I were in a bedroom on my bed, playing this game we called the baby game. Basically, just one of us pretend to be a baby, while the other person was the parent. Sometimes the baby was a bad baby, sometimes good. I think that my youngest son was just wanting some nurturing after a bad breakup between his parents. My son was being the baby, and I was lying beside him, stroking him and talking to him. It was early evening, and my bedside lamp was on. My bed was a box spring and a mattress without legs, so it was kind of close to the ground. I was looking over at my son, and right beside the bedside table was this thing again. It was only there for a second and then disappeared fast enough that I didn't trust my eyes. It was 2 or 3 feet high, taller size, and was standing right against the bed like an inch away from my son. It was covered in long, slightly curly caramel-colored hair, but it had no face, arms or shoulders that I could see. It looked like Cousin It from the Addams Family. It didn't have the shape of a dog. It was straight up and down. As I said, it was split second, so I didn't see any movement. I didn't feel any energy from it, negative or otherwise. It was neutral. I was really surprised to see it. I didn't see anything to my son because I honestly believed that it was somewhere sight issue. A few minutes later, it was my turn to be the baby. Someone's looking over at me, and I was close to the edge of the bed. He blinked for a second and said, "Mom, I just saw this weird thing. I think it was a wig creature or a ghost dog." He described the exact same thing, color and shape, and he said he only saw for a second. He had been claiming throughout the time we lived there that he saw a giant bulldog faces in the middle of the room. I thought that he was making it up because he had a bulldog stuffy that he really liked. We also saw a lot of ghosts there in that place. Pretty much, you turn on the light, you could see a whole bunch of people standing in the dark. In the front was an old lady, and the back was a little Asian girl. I had a very elaborate way of turning on my lights at night that involved me never looking in the dark, and in bed, I never opened my eyes. Well, to begin, I get my Native American blood from my mother's side. Her mother was a full-blooded Chippewa, although they didn't talk much about it. So I sought out elders when I was in my early 20s. When I was about 12 years old, my mom and dad got divorced, and we moved to Florida, where my mother's half-sisters lived. While visiting my Aunt Caroline, who lived in a little town called Osprey, 15 miles outside of Sarasota, which is on the western coast of Florida. South Tampa is where I saw a skunk ape, my mom and aunt. were talking, so I decided to walk through the nature because I love it. I headed for a wooded area. I had to cross a cow pasture to get to the woods. About halfway across the pasture is when I saw this hairy man. It was standing next to a palmetto bush, just staring at me. That is all I remember, because the next thing I know, I'm walking on the street in front of my mom's house. I never told anyone until years later. Again, in my 20s at my dad's house in Michigan, there was a summer of strange events. Something was breathing outside my window, so loud it woke me up out of a sound sleep. My stepmother confided in me that she saw a tall, hairy man run across the backyard at night. My dad had two different events where something was making a high-pitched noise and slapped against the side of the trailer. My uncle, who lived across the street, said one night he heard what sounded like a grown man wrestling in the woods behind the house. During this time, one of my elders had asked my dad if he had a couple of friends who could build a sweat lodge on the 15 acres that my dad owns. My dad said yes, so they came out to do the ceremony. It was a year later, and they hadn't built the lodge, so I went to the elders and asked if something was wrong. One of them said it just didn't feel right. I decided to tell them about my weird experiences, which had stopped after they did the ceremony on my dad's land. They all said that it was Unchi, which meant Bigfoot. They explained. He shows up when things are out of balance to remind people to live in a good way to restore balance. Later, I learned about putting down tobacco when entering the woods in their territory and asking permission to pass through. It is said that they will guide you and protect you, and although you will not know they are there, usually, the Bigfoot is also known as Kichi Sabe, and is taught that they brought honesty to the people. Some of my internet friends make jokes at my expense because I live in Arkansas. Do you even have electricity? And do you find your cousin attractive? What we do have is a fuckload of trees and mountains. You leave the greater Little Rock area and drive through 30 minutes and hit a town. Another 30 minutes, you hit another town, another 30, and you see where this is going. You know the saying, the universe is 99% empty space. That's basically this fucking state, but it's 99% woods. I lived on the edge of one. Such huge, expansive woods. I spent a lot of time in the woods with my friends. We find normal dead animal carcasses, weird fire circles set up by local rednecks or meth heads, and other basic inner wood stuff. So one night, I was going through some normal teenage and shit, and I was sitting on the roof looking at the stars. It's mostly full moon, and I can see through the trees, and it's really chill up there. It was a nice autumn breeze. My mom and little sister were sitting outside on the hot tub right under the edge of the roof in front of me. I hear them get up to go in, and I'm still relaxing. You know the feeling where, something is watching you. It's different from the regular spooky vibe you'll get. Is something in your brain that doesn't care about the reason or reality TV. He's the hit or woman over the head and get it. All of a sudden, my relaxation is gone. I immediately know something is not okay. I know something is staring at me, and it would like nothing better than to eat my scrawny ass. Just for reference, there's an edge of the roof, just about 6 feet of deck, and then 20 feet of yard, until our 6-foot privacy fence. We set up the privacy fence in front of the shitty chain link fence that was there before we moved in because, meth heads. And then behind the fence is a ton of shitty bushes and shrubs. And then right behind that is trees. I start to scan the fence, and I noticed something directly in front of where I was going. Keep in mind, my mom, a little sister, would have been between me and it. So I noticed this outline. All I know is I see black of the shrubs and trees. And then right above the privacy fence is what looks like brown-colored outline of a head and shoulders. My first thought was, the fuck is someone standing on the chain link, spent looking over? I think rattles like a motherfucker when I climb on it, so it can't be that. Apparently my feet had gone under and started moving my ass towards the edge of the roof without consulting my brain. I get to the edge of the roof and looking at this outline when I hear a scream from a horror movie monster. Imagine if you shoved a bear, a cougar, and one of those screech owls into a mosh pit and recorded the noises, then added some heavy distortion to it. I remember instantly turning and running to the opposite side of the roof, parkoured off that bitch, and ran inside, crying to my mom. This is a true account of something strange that happened to me and two friends one summer in the early 2000s. It happened in the town that I grew up in, with one of the friends being a lifelong friend from childhood and the other a college friend of his. We had gone to different schools, and being home for the summer, we were just having a lot of fun partying and whatnot. This particular night, I got together with my friend James and his friend Mark. It was a hot night, and we decided to jump the fence to our own town pool and go swimming. We had done this a dozen times before and have never had any trouble, and only ever needed to keep an eye out on local cops. We got there, hopped the fence, and stargaze on top of the canopies, and then we went swimming. We weren't that loud, as we didn't want to attract any attention of any cops through looking for kids. About an hour into being there, all of us in the pool, we heard a low grumble come from the woods that surrounded the pool on three sides. It rose quickly, intensity and volume, with a rapid Doppler effect that came towards us from deep in the woods. It sounded like a pack of very angry dogs or wolves or something, all roaring ever louder like talking over one another. It came so fast, charging to the tree line in the chain-link fence that surrounds the pool grounds. I've never been so frightened in my life. The thing I can remember clearly was there were no sounds of footballs whatever. It was moved to the woods at such a rapid speed, with no discernible thumps or branches being crushed underfoot, or branches or anything being moved. The awful roaring reached a crescendo just as it broke the tree line and got to the fence. Or, so our ears told us, because we couldn't see anything there. We all remained frozen in the pool, just staring and waiting for our deaths. I really don't know how long we stayed motionless in the pool staring, but the sound stopped abruptly when it got to the end of the grounds. It was such an awful, heart-chilling sound. It made her bun run cold on a hot summer night. After God knows how long, we all snapped out of it and got out of the pool. We hauled ourselves out, grabbed her clothes, and ran dripping wet and jumped the fence and took off. Now, the thing is, this is the suburbs, only about 20 minutes outside of New York City. So there are no bears, no wolves, and I've never seen a dog without a master, much less a pack of wild dogs out there. This was one of the most frightening moments of my life. I have no idea what it was. I actually completely forgot about the incident to a few years ago when my friend James brought it up, and the entire thing came flooding back at once. The only thing I can compare the sound to is one on a Bigfoot documentary, where I saw a man who said that he heard one mimic the sound of this. That's the closest I've heard. Being that it is the suburbs outside a very densely packed city, and knowing the size of the woods, I find it near impossible for it to be that these woods are not large enough at all to sustain something like that. It's bordered by schools, businesses, and houses, so I don't really know what it was after all this time. I asked my friend about it again 2 Christmases ago, and he said he thought it was aliens. I haven't spoken to Mark as he was more of my friend's friend, but I am now curious what he thinks after all this time. My name is Dustin, and I grew up in a town called Cranbrook. It's in southeast British Columbia, in the Kootenays, the middle of nowhere. This story happened about 14 or 15 years ago, 2002 or 2003, with my 3 other friends, DB, PD, and SR. We were driving around the streets of Cranbrook like any other night. It was around 10 p.m. DB was driving his mom's car. SR was in the back seat behind him. PD was sitting passenger, and I was behind him, if my memory is cracked. We came to a stop on 2nd Street, crossing Cranbrook Street north to the 10 Book 4 Street building to our left, waiting to cross the crosswalks to the young boy who was wearing what looked like a hospital gown and seemed to be glowing. His gown, his skin, and his hair, all illuminated as the boy began to cross. I recall him appearing to be an old man, suddenly still glowing. Once the figure was directly in front of the car, it was now an old, haggard Aboriginal woman. The gown and glow were gone, and she was wearing layers of old tater clothes. Once she got to the sidewalk, she collapsed, folded right over, and fell into the ground. PT rolled down his passenger window and asked if she needed help. Her response is quick and very raspy and trill. She said, "No, I don't. Call the police." No, he must have been in shock, or even just memorized by the incomprehension. Because we just went to Safeway, which was open until 11 p.m. and called 911 on the payphone. By this point, we were in giddy frenzy trying to rationalize what we saw. Despite our curiosities and imaginations, we were all about 18 and 19 years old. Then when we went back to the intersection, the police were already there. The woman had made her way toward the 10 back building, sitting against the brick wall. The police were approaching her, and she sat in the darkness. We drove off, and that was the last we heard of it or followed up of it. I often wonder what it could have happened. If the police called, did they offer help? What if we let her in the car or even got her to the car for aid? What was it, an alien, a skinwalker, or a figment of collective imaginations? To this day, all four of us remember what we saw, and all those certain details may differ in our stories. We all agree we witnessed something unexplainable. This happened when I was 11 years old. I used to have this little electric mini bike that went about 20 or so miles per hour and had a small little light on the front of it so I could see in the dark. I used it to get to my friend's house and back. On one particular summer night, I drove over to a friend's house on my mini bike at around 5 or 6 p.m. to play with him on his Xbox 360. I believe we play Call of Duty 4 or World at War. I'm not sure which one we played. All I know is that I stayed there till around 9 at night, and since my parents were easygoing parents and we lived about 2 miles away, they didn't mind that I stayed home late. When I went outside of my friend's house after I say goodbye to him, I went to go on my mini bike to drive back home. Keep in mind, the whole way there, around his house of mine too, are largely wooded areas. So, we would always hear creatures moving around and always hear crickets when I hopped on my bike, and I happened to notice I didn't hear anything at all. Not even any crickets. It was just silence. This was a very odd because we always hear them, and there are thousands of them in the woods. There was something that made them quiet. Take note that the mini bike was electric and didn't make much sound when it accelerated, since it was summer and pretty early in the summer, around mid-July. It was still pretty light out at 9 p.m., not too light, but enough to make out someone's face from about 10 to 15 yards away. As I started heading home, I felt very uneasy, as if I was being watched, and I still heard nothing of the crickets. I was coming up at a T-junction where I would have to turn left to continue down the road for about a half mile, and make another left at an unlit intersection, it going down straight until my house came up. As I was approaching the T-junction, I could barely make out something in the tree straight ahead of me. I saw a pair of eyes in the trees. My first instinct was thinking it was maybe an owl or something, because we got quite a few owls up here where we live, until I saw I had blood-red eyes. When I got closer, I could tell whatever the fuck that thing was not an owl, and his eyes were 9 feet off the ground. Before I go on, I must say there's a legend around where I lived at night. Sasquatch would come out and hunt, which was obvious, or so I thought. Bullshit. I never believed in Bigfoot or cryptids. But when I saw these eyes and how far off the ground they were, I immediately thought of this legend. I pissed my pants when I saw this because I was a very paranoid person at the time, and still am, and would always assume the worst. I was terrified, and knew that I would have to make this T-junction very fast and book it the fuck home when I turned left. I was going as fast as I could on that mini bike. I lost sight of the eyes and thought thing had just ran off until I heard the woods. But whatever this thing was easily keeping pace with me. I started crying at this point and kept just driving as fast as I could down the road. I started approaching the intersection when the tree stopped and there would be a bit of a clearing on all sides of it, and saw 9 and a 2-foot tall, hairy, disgusting-looking bees come out of the freaking woods. It was coming straight for me. I made the left as fast as I could, and I'm not sure if it was a miracle, but I saw a pair of headlights coming down the road. I turned behind me and saw the beast step into the woods, because it would be illuminated by this person's headlights. As soon as I passed the person, I heard the crickets again, and hoped that this beast would just leave me alone. When I got home, I shut the garage door, locked every window in the house, and my mom saw me obviously uneasy and pale, and asked what was wrong. I never told her, or anyone for that matter. Not up until now. I don't know what the thing was. Possibly a Sasquatch, but whatever it was, I hope I never see it again. I've since moved into a dorm at my college, and so I don't visit my parents, who still live where they did when I was 11. I hope no one ever has to endure the fear that I felt that night. We were in the Dominican Republic, staying at a locally owned hotel. It was a nice hotel, but nothing locks and very open, soft airspace. We had all gone out for dinner and enjoyed a bottle of wine, but weren't drunk or anything. I'm eating in bed, and my husband comes out from the bathroom completely white-faced in shock. There's a spider in the bathroom. I look at him and laugh. Spiders in the Dominican Republic are big, but nothing to freak over. He looked like as of Satan himself, by his expression. So I go to the bathroom. All I see are 4 thick, hairy orange and black legs coming from the sink basin. They were at least 10 inches long and at least as thick as pencils, very hairy. From about 5 feet away, I could see separate orange-black hairs. I'm short, so I couldn't see the whole thing over the sink from the distance I was. There was a towel blocking the direct view, plus the sink basin. But just by the legs, I saw that it was almost a 2-foot-long spider. I calmly walk back to my husband. Did you see it? I nod and leave the room to get help from the front desk. Our broken Spanish have the staffers an hysterical laugher, not to mention that they had just took as overactive tours of scared of a little spider. One staffer, Jose, came to look and it was gone. Jose tells us that he has at least 3 in his home, which is when I realize that these people don't either believe me or understand what I'm saying. I've lived in tropical climes before, and there's no way in hell you'd share a home with a spider we saw. A day later, and we have a normal spider infestation. I go to the desk and ask for bug spray. The staffers are still having a laugh at our expense, but the same guy Jose comes up with me with the spray. We're cleaning the spiders, and we are about 5 inches or so of daddy long leg types. He's surprised when I'm suddenly not scared by these spiders. Yes, why I informed him that these spiders aren't what we saw last night. I use my hands to show them the size of the one we saw. His mouth dropped. I've never heard or seen anything like that in my entire life in the Dominican Republic, but who knows what comes out of the jungle. It wasn't until a little while later that my husband, while discussing with Harry, our pet name for the spider, realized that we'd only seen half of it. My estimate of a 10-inch leg would probably actually be about 22 feet, was severely off. He saw the whole body, and the body minus the legs. It was as wide as his entire hand, a grown man's hand, so it was likely way bigger than 2 feet in diameter. He also said there were multiple black eyes. So this happened a couple of years ago. I was walking home from my work, and my road is a busy road, so it's busy with people and cars, and it was rush hour. Walking towards me from a distance was somebody wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. I noticed something seemed to be wrong with their face. I didn't want to look at them too much and avoid being rude, but I couldn't help but noticing that they were walking in a hurried way and as if they did not want to be seen, keeping their head down. As I got closer to them, I couldn't resist getting a closer look, so I looked over to their face, and it was almost completely blank. Like when you're editing a photo and you turn the brightness or contrast all the way up, so all the facial features are gone apart from the eyes, mouth, and nose. This is what this person's face was. But instead of pure white, more the yellow white of the moon or magnolia paint. That's not all. Well, to their face, religious images flooded in my mind of horror, evil, and hell. That was a total fist for me. I'm not a religious person at all. My mind got very bad vibes from what I had just seen, and something told me that I should forget about what I'd seen and not think about it again. Very unusual for me. I'm not usually a curious person, but I felt compelled to forget about this ASAP. So, I actually made an effort to not think about it, and didn't tell anyone about it until several weeks later when the emotions I felt were more faded. I don't think they just had a deformity or skin condition, because there was nothing there, rather than something, and the emotions and images I got from looking at their face were unlike anything I've ever experienced. I wish I hadn't tried to forget it so instantly, as I might remember other things about it that could point to a more logical explanation or something else, whatever it may be. A little bit context before I start this. It was Christmas night. The day was pleasant and festive. Opening presents early in the morning with my sisters, hearty breakfast made my dad, delicious smells from the kitchen as mom and dad prepared a feast. Visits from extended family bringing pies and cakes for desserts. Around 2, we all sat down to eat and then lazed about for the rest of the afternoon into the evening. Now to the story. About 8. After everyone had left and the food was all put away for round 2 of the following day, I decided to head over to visit my friend in the next village. The drive would be about 10 minutes if I took back roads to get there, so I did. First, a little background on where my friend lived. It was a housing development surrounded by private lakes. You might call it a gated community. You could still drive through it freely after hours, by entering one of 4 private entry points. Since the community was built around the lake, the road surrounding it went into a spiral sort of shape. The houses were sparsely positioned on the outermost part of the spiral road, closest to the 4 private entry points. As you drove in further, there were a lot more houses positioned closer and closer to the lake. My friend lived on the outer edge of this development, so once I reached the entry point, I would only take a few more minutes until I reached his house. His house, along with all the others, were far enough apart that you couldn't see them from the road as you drove by. There were either woods all around with long drives or open fields with long drives. You could see porch lights on in the distance, but that was about it. As I entered into the development, the speed limit dropped from 30 miles down to 20. There were no street lights in the development, and for some reason, I never put my high beams on. I couldn't go any faster than the speed limit, because there were speed bumps in every 30 feet or so. It was about midnight. I remember having my driver's side window open, slightly taking in some fresh air. I remember driving in silence, which was usual for me. I must have been enjoying the quietness after a commotion of Christmas Day. I reached a section of road that had been barren fields on either side and wood set back. Houses were probably nestled back into the trees. As I drove, I noticed that something looked like someone walking up on a road ahead on the opposite side of the road, coming in my direction. Mind you, I was still going about 20 miles per hour the whole time, so it was probably less than a minute by the time the walker came into clear view. I got a quick scan of it in my windshield, before my car was parked exactly in the parallel. This is what I saw. It was not a person. It stood on 2 legs, with long arms hanging down from his shoulders. It was strong-looking, lean, muscular, but not beefy in stature. It looked thin at the same time. It's still at least 7 feet tall. It was light-colored, not sure whether it was white, tan, yellow, or gray. It didn't appear to have fur, but some texture to the skin was there. It definitely wasn't smooth. There appeared to be something coming down off its back. I don't know what this was. All I can recall about is face, as small features that I had, but the mouth and jaw were noticeably large. It had pointed things atop its head, 2 things going straight upward, with something mingled between the 2 things. That's what I got from a quick scan, and from my observation of it as it neared my car and my car neared it. As my car became parallel to within a split second, I went from looking at my windshield to looking at it from my driver's side window. In that moment, its face quickly appeared down at me, and all I remember was the mouth opening wide. Out came a remarkable scream that I'll never forget. It gives me chill just thinking about it. It consisted of a high-pitched, real shriek enveloped by a deep, guttural growl. Both sounds happened simultaneously in that scream. I kept driving all the while. This was all happening so fast that I couldn't even have the chance to be scared or shocked or anything. I continued driving, went past my friend's house, and drove home. I called him to tell him what happened and that I just need to get back. I was probably running on adrenaline to get back home. Later on, I was in total shock after it sunk in. Have my driver's side window been open fully, it could have touched me, or worse, taken me. I'm certain of it. To this day, I still haven't worked out what it was. Anyone else ever see or hear anything similar to this? This happened well over 10 years ago, so I cannot provide dates, but my experience happened in Salt Fork, Ohio. I have forgotten about it for years. Into a silly television show jolted my memory. Now, the more I think on it and write on it, the more details I remember, and the more intriguing it becomes to me. I became very excited after reading another member's story that sounds so similar to what I experienced that essentials down my spine. This is the post I made after reading a similar account by another member. I am in the opinion that we experienced the same thing, so swamp. Here's my story. The first telling I wrote on here, I had just seen an Animal Planet cryptozoology episode that took place in the same remote area that I had my encounter. When I wrote my reaction in the comment box of the other member's experience, I was more focused on the details that surfaced from my memory than the first time I was told about that happened. So here is the second that I recall. It was late. We were sitting around the campfire, eating hot dogs and cleaning our rifles from a day's volley of rounds, when out of nowhere, this horrible, ear-piercing, aggressive scream came from the tree line, no more than 20 yards away. This thing was so loud that I could feel the vibrations of the sound waves go through my chest. I was just like being at a metal concert and being too close to the speakers. Whatever this thing was, it was angry, and it seemed directed at us. I am sure you are familiar with wildlife indigenous to your area, as in you know the sounds they can make. I'm also a veteran camper, and I know all the sounds of the night brings, from coyotes, owls, foxes, etc. Let me just say, this is like nothing I have ever heard, period. This was no coyote, fox, bear, owl, falcon, or etc. The 3 of us jolted up and instinctively ported eye rifles in the direction of the awful noise. I want to pull a trigger right then, but I was afraid things would go from bad to worse. My buddy Brian, voice shaking, goes, "I'm going back to the car." We started slowly walking towards the car. I still have my Remington aimed steady at the group of trees, ready to fire. As I got a bit further away, I thought that maybe it would not follow us if we let off a shot or two, so I did. I fired 2 rounds into the dark woods, and, just based on intuition alone, I think whatever made the sound was long gone. We made to the car and sat inside, clutching rifles until daybreak. When we got back to the campsite, everything was how we left it. Nothing was missing or damaged. The 3 of us have never been so scared, and we haven't spoken since the incident. I've always been fascinated by tales of cryptic water monsters, though I've never actually seen one myself. But my stepfather's father, an eccentric yet sharp-to-the-point individual, ordinarily isn't given to making up fanciful tales, and whom I'll call Bill, once recalled the time during World War II when he was serving aboard a ship that may have been called into the English Channel. He noticed a commotion one evening on the back deck when he went to investigate. Many crewmen were carrying on. Those who happened to have cameras were eagerly snapping photos, though conveniently, Bill didn't have one. What he claims to have saw was something astonishing. A creature wise traveling in the water in a perpendicular fashion, just slowly enough to frighten the crewmen into thinking their vessel will collide with this beast. The creature, whose long back broke the water and looked something like a crocodile's, had its head held out of the water as it traveled. Its incredible size was said to be even longer than the vessel itself. Bill stared open-mouthed as he recounted the vessel, and the creature actually did come very close to colliding. But apparently, the animal had a clear destination of mind. It simply kept on traveling without acknowledging the vessel were looking left or right. Luckily for those on board, and it was not seen to submerge. Crew members followed it with their eyes as long as they were able to until it finally disappeared from sight. This did not sound like a crocodile of me, even a large one. When I pressed Bill for a better description, he stubbornly gathered his bearings and stated, "Well, looked like a dinosaur, that's all there is to it. A dinosaur, I swear to it." This was especially chilling to me. Hello, I'm going to just call myself Hunter for privacy reasons. I'm a fairly strong guy and pretty brave, and I swear on my life this is true. 17 in Canada and First Nations territory. My mom and sister were in the city. Today's journey from where I live, and my dad was at work. We have 6 dogs because, well, my sister loves them, and I was alone to do anything really. I was bored on this day and decided to go for a walk up the creek close by my house. After that, I walked in the field that had a broken-down house since 1985, so this was a relatively old house. After a while, I decided to sit and enjoy the scenery. I had my earbuds in, so I didn't hear anything. I didn't realize, so after my MP3 player died, that everything was dead quiet. And I could swear for a split second, I thought I heard a voice. And then I heard it. "Hunter, over here. I need help." It was my sister's voice, but it was off. Like someone took a tube and said it. All I had was my hunting knife. I was split between my loyalty or my instincts telling me to run, until I remembered my sister was gone. So I started to walk away, very slowly, but then I heard heavy footsteps. My mind was racing, and I was like a statue. Then, suddenly, I felt breathing on my neck. I jabbed at whatever was behind me with my elbow until I felt what felt like a human shin. I bolted faster than I thought possible. While I was running, I got up my knife and slid under the fence and ran home. But then I looked behind me, and I saw a man with pale skin standing damn near 10 feet tall. He then opened his wide mouth, and he let out this horrifying screech. I ran harder while saying, "No, no, 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 no." When I got home, I locked the doors and got my sister's dog, and stayed in my room the whole day for the first time. I was afraid. I still go on walks, and I always bring my knives, and I also always keep one earbud out. I talked about this with a few people, like my elders and my sister. My elder said it was an evil witch doctor trying to gain my life force, but my sister said it was the wendigo. But I am sure of one thing. I never, and I mean never, ran so hard in my life. Around January 2001, I was driving around with a friend of mine, just chatting and catching up. We decided to call it a night and drove to an area that was close to our flash at a regular park. This was a semi-waste ground, commonly called the Components Factory, thanks to a light industrial area that was now defunct. Besides the local coach park. Driving alongside the road, we noticed a couple looking and pointing up at us. There was something floating above the building. At first, it literally looked like pieces of black rags that were suspended off the building. There was a noticeable gap between the roof and the Gregs. We parked the car, and I asked my roommate to run back with me to have a closer look at what that thing was. He wasn't having any of it, he said, and wanted to go home. As peculiar as I found his lack of interest in this, was I understood that he seemed uneased about checking it out and accepted that he wasn't going to come along. I therefore ran on my own to the building to see that the couple had moved on and that the thing was no longer on top of the building but floating parallel to the ground at the same height that it had been when I originally saw it. I was able to take a closer look at it, and here's when the story somewhat turns weird. What I saw was a floating 8 to 10 meters off the ground, height of the building, plus then some. It looked for all intents and purposes like a small and long dog skull, where I can make out the snout part in the concave areas where the eye should have been. In addition to the least small canine fang protrusion coming out of the end of the snout. The rags seemed to be made of genuine fabric, but it looked like a cross between a hood and a matted fur, and started halfway into the dog's skull, and hangs loosely for less than a meter in thick clumps. Whatever it was, I can only describe it as inanimate, since it was just floating. Hovering is probably a better description. Away from the terminal. It made a beeline as the crow flies past Resident Bach and out the nearby marina, where it went out to sea, avoiding a long mast of ships in their berths. I had to run around the building to keep up to the marina to see it float away. That was the last I ever saw of that thing, and I've never experienced anything remarkable since or before that, for that matter. The next day, my friend only briefly acknowledged what we saw. Whilst driving, but never wanted to know more about it, he moved out from Gibraltar to the UK shortly afterwards, not really to the incident, and haven't seen him since. I would certainly appreciate any input on what others think this may have been. I have a few stories. I don't know why things keep happening to me, but I have no reason to lie. I can't tell my stories in normal settings for fear of being branded a nut. But the following actually happened to me, and I love to hear from anybody who has had similar experiences. I used to work nights in a nightclub in Perth, Western Australia, and on my way home, I had to walk through a large park called Hyde Park. Hyde Park had concrete pass line with huge Moreton Bay fig trees. They are massive trees with large roots, big enough to sit on. One night I was walking along the path when I noticed the roots of one of the trees were shaped like a person. I thought it was cool. When I got close, I knelt down to have a better look. As I bent down, the figure in the tree looked up at me. I think it was a he. I'm not 100% sure though. He was nestled in the roots of the tree and sort of appeared to be a part of it. He was kind of wet looking. At first, I thought he was the victim of a mugging or something, and I started to ask if he was all right, but before I could get the words out, I realized he was not human at all. Had a big omen-shaped eyes. Cat-like, I think. I guess he looked like pictures of demons of aliens. Grace, to be precise. He had a very, very kind eyes, though. And I wish I'd stayed to talk, but I was too freaked out that I ran without looking. The next day I went back to look at the tree, and there was nothing resembling a person at all. It would be kind of a relief to me if I could write the experience off as a trick at the light or something. But I trust my senses. I saw a few strange things in the park, but that was by far the spookiest.